Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Elon 11. Graphic Policy Radio is the comics podcast for people who read comics and also know that comics, like all art, are political and always have been. As we end the year 2018, the longest and gayest and teenest of all years, it's time to talk about the comics we loved, the comics we lost, the comics we can't wait to keep reading. We share this so you can find more great comics to read and so you can argue with us on Twitter. Joining me today, I've got a great roundtable of folks. I've got Bilal Shelby. Bilal is a non-binary writer who focuses on queerness in historical and speculative fiction. You should totally follow them at Bilal AUP. That's BILALIPAUP. Alex K Cossa is a contributor to Graphic Policy, a lover of Valiant Comics, and co-host of Those Two Geeks. Stephen Attewell writes about the intersection of history, politics, and pop culture in the people's history of the Marvel Universe. In his day job, he teaches public policy at City University of New York's Murphy Institute for Labor Studies, and he is the founder of Race for the Iron Throne. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's start off with the big picture of, like, I'm not someone who's going to say, what's the number one best, or you could only list your top three or whatever, but, like, what are some of the best new comics you read this year? Like, new series or new graphic novel that was just released? I can say that for me, one of the best ones is something that literally just came out a couple weeks ago, which is Die comic from Stephanie Hans and Kieran Gillen. I know folks know that I'm, like, the biggest fan of all of their work, so that's not a big surprise. But what else are you guys thinking of?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Steven.
Sure. You already stole Die from me, so I'll throw two up there. Kelly Thompson's, like, I mean, it's got two different names, but her Rogan Gambit comic is, like, routinely really, really good. And also Crowded, which I believe is Image.
Yes, it is. Yeah, Crowded is great.
Yeah. Hold on, I just want to...
Crowded is Chris Sabella as the writer and the artist, with artists Rose Stein, Ted Brandt, Triana Farrell, Cardinal Ray. I was, like, literally just catching up on it, but yeah, Chris was on my podcast earlier this year to talk about Crowded. It's, like, it's really good, sort of dystopian future right around the corner with a lot of really good insight.
Yeah, that, you know, what I thought was amazing about it is that initially I wasn't gonna read it because the pitch sounded so much like a bad episode of Black Mirror, like What If Social Media but Too Far. And the way it was actually handled, once I, actually read an issue, was so deft and clever, and, the characters were interesting, and the writing was good, and the art was, like, this really kind of gorgeous cartoony style, that, like, I instantly, all of my, like, reservations were gone.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Bilal?
I think something that really surprised me this year was Saladin Ahmed and Javier Rodriguez's Exiles. It started. I think from the first page, it was just really beautiful and really smart and incredibly satisfying. And it's a book that I'm really interested to see where it goes. And then The Wilds by Vita Ayala. And I can't think of the artist right now. I probably should have wrote it down.
Emily Pearson with colorist Marissa Louise.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that one is just another, visually stunning, really smart and political book. Post-apocalyptic, quote unquote, kind of zombies, but they have flowers growing out of their faces, which is really beautiful and disturbing. Yeah, it's just a fun, interesting queer book.
Yeah, Vita was on the podcast to talk about it actually as well. And Chris Sabella was on to talk about Crowded earlier. Yeah, I love it. You guys are totally mentioning some of the favorite ones I've had guests on for this year. And yeah, those are all titles I really like. What about you, Alex?
One of my favorite books I've read this year, and it's really only just started, is Grumble by Rafer Roberts and Mike Norton. It's kind of, art history, magic in the real world. If you've read the Dresden books, it's almost kind of like that. It's the way to liken it. And it reminds me a lot of Constantine. But it's, I don't know, there's just a lot to it. And I read the first issue a while ago. And the second issue came out this week, but my LCS didn't get a copy. And I think there's issues with the ordering. So I haven't read the second issue yet, but based on the first issue alone, it's one of the things I'm really looking forward to getting more of next year. And I also wanted to pump The Highest House by, I think it's Mike Carey and Peter Gross. It's published by IDW. It's a 6-issue miniseries, and it comes in a brilliant kind of oversized paperback collection now. And I've read it yesterday and today, and it is phenomenal. I really cannot recommend it high enough, but I don't want to talk about the plot too much because I went in completely blind, and I want anyone else that reads it based on my recommendation to also go in completely blind. But I mean, the synopsis basically, it talks about there's a kid that's sold into slavery early on, and it questions whether or not, is being born a slave a fact, and can facts be changed? So if you haven't read that, I would highly recommend doing so.
It's a good thing you mentioned sort of like limited series, because I feel like there's a number of sort of, short runs, like limited series this year that have been really exciting. I know that Twisted Romance back in February, which literally all came out in the month of February, series of I guess out of the box romance comics anthology that Alex DeCampi wrote with a lot of different other contributors like Trungles and Alejandra Gutierrez, Meredith McLaren. I really loved that and have come back to it a few times, and including some short stories. And I usually have a hard time making myself focus on reading short stories in comics when there is prose mixed in, but I even enjoyed those. And like, frankly, it's a genre that I haven't really spent much time thinking about or having anything to do with. And I read it because I like Alex, and she was helping get some folks who I followed on social media their first sort of big comics gig. And I was just so happy because like, there just aren't comics like this. There haven't been, like, there's romance as a thing in lots of comics, and I don't know, stuff like Raven and Pirate Princess, like one of the things I love most about it is the romance. But romance comics were huge back in the day. They're not really as broad as they had been, and it was really fun to get it. And it's a 4-issue series, but it's now available in trade paperback. Really awesome art. I mean, for me, another miniseries I really enjoyed was Abbott, Saladin Ahmed, and I'm forgetting the name of the artist.
That was great.
Yeah.
Artist Sami Cavella and Jason Wardy. Yeah, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
I mean, just that it's like the concept was just brilliant, like sort of 70s noir, slightly blaxploitation, sort of journalism thriller with magical horror elements.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of
it's a hard one to sum up.
A lot of body horror and some like voodoo imagery with the backdrop of like racism and racism and queerness, and the main character is this black woman protagonist who has a full and complete work and full and complete professional and romantic life, which really filled the story out. You know what I mean? So many people write, protagonists that are black women, and they don't make them complete people. and the story kind of falters, but I think Abbott did a really good job with making the main character like a person people can relate to and see as a real person, if that makes sense.
That's a good, yeah, totally. You know, and speaking of Saladin Ahmed, I mean, one of my questions I wanted to talk about are like, who are the creators, artists, writers, editors who like had a big breakthrough this year? And I really think this has been the year of Saladin Ahmed. I mean, you know, Black Bolt started to come out last year, but it ended this year. You know, this year he had Quicksilver, who's like a favorite character of mine easily, Abbott. I've been really loving Exiles, which you mentioned before. And he's just been writing a ton of new stuff, and I think,
like he's now taking over Spider-Man and Miss Marvel at once. So like, some of the most important young characters of color in super, you know, mainstream big two superhero comics are like all under his roof. It's gonna be really interesting to see like how he, you know, maintains both of their like similar but very distinct voices.
Yeah, and he's been really a part of all of these conversations around representation and what makes, you know, the difference between people writing characters of color who aren't that, you know, who don't have that experience and people who do. And I think he's been really I think he's been watching all of these conversations and taking all of the best points and arguments from them into these characters that he's been making or creating or writing for. You know, I'm going to talk a lot about Vita Ayala this podcast. Yeah, they're a friend of mine, but also they've had such a meteoric rise this year. With the Wilds and with Submerged, all of the DC work they've done, and then taking Livewire, one of Valiant's characters that really, in my opinion, should have gotten this level of focus probably when they relaunched a few years ago. And I think Vita has such an eye for weirdness and such a way with writing women and writing non-binary and gender non-conforming characters, and I'm so excited to see what they do next.
I know that Vita is going to be doing the Magic the Gathering comics this upcoming year, and that's absolutely one of the things I'm most excited about.
Oh yeah, like we have this joke where there'll be a weird headline about something, and then Vita will say like, "Hey guys, I'm working on a new comic this year." Like there was one about a deer got into a restaurant, and like it was like running around, and there was no one in there, and then Vita was like, "Oh, hey everyone, I'm working on a new comic this year. Stay tuned." Like their brain is just always, you know, thinking up something new.
Another great miniseries was New Mutants: Dead Souls by Matthew Rosenberg, Adam Gorham, Michael Garland, and Clayton Cowles on letters. And yes, every issue was named after a different Joy Division song. Trying to catch up on that. There's this amazing moment where they're super cornered and it looks like everyone's about to die, and like Richter says, "Time to make like the Alamo," and Boom Boom is like, "You know we lost, right?" And he says, "You know I'm Mexican, right?" It's like, yes. Such a good job of like actually capturing the gothness of magic. But that definitely was a good miniseries, you know, and I'd completely fallen out of reading X books entirely. But they've just recently started like hiring people who I'm really into to do bits and bobs of X-Men stuff, and it might end up getting me to pay attention again. Like the one-off issue of Emma Frost that it was Bachelot on art, even though I'm actually not that big of a fan of his, to be honest, and I think his costume for Emma was redonkulous. But written by Leah Williams, she just wrote one hell of an Emma Frost. Holy crap. So and she'll be coming on the show very soon.
Oh, cool.
So that, you know, it's like a random one-off, one-issue thing, and she just really rocked it. I know that also from like graphic novel land, The Pervert by Michelle Perez and Remy Boydell was something that I sort of, you know, I started to thumb through it to get ready for having them on the show, but then I was just immediately immersed and read the whole entire book, even though it was the middle of the workday. So there's that. The Pervert is really beautiful painted, human animals as humans, basically, talking about a young trans woman's experience doing sex work in Portland, Oregon, and her relationships with people. And it also includes some interesting flashback stories to one of the other characters and how he fell in love back in the 80s. And it's really beautiful. It's kind of mournful, but in a way that's completely earned. I don't really read much like animals as people stuff, but I actually feel like it worked really well for this book. Did anybody else read The Pervert?
Nope.
Get on it.
It's sitting on my desk right now.
Oh wow, well definitely get on it.
Yeah.
Another, on the other end of things, graphic novel that was really great this year was Cardboard Kingdom, which was written by Chad Sells and like literally everybody in the world, because there's like a million writers on it, which is an all ages graphic novel that is totally like, if you want to give kids something really wholesome and really diverse that also really encourages people to get creative, like this is that. Like, I don't want to make it sound wholesome in a way that's not. I mean, I plowed through that book too. I really enjoyed it, but it's sort of like, this is exactly what your teacher, or like a good, like progressive minded teacher, would want you to read, because it's all about kids using their creativity and like learning emotional intelligence and building sensitivity to each other. And it has the most diverse cast and the most diverse writing staff. You know, like young queer and gender nonconforming kids and immigrant kids, and you know, kids with different neurotypical and neuroatypical, and just like every kind of kid in the world, all interacting together, being creative, and the art is so much fun. So if you need to buy a book for any kids, like, and I obviously enjoyed it plenty as a grown-up, get on that. Cardboard Kingdom.
Yeah, I read Cardboard Kingdom this summer, and the really interesting thing about it is it kind of gives kids this lesson about if an adult makes you feel bad about something that you like and it's not hurting anybody, you don't really have to listen to that adult, which I think is a thing that more kids media needs. Sort of, sometimes adults in your life will push you into like normative behavior, and you don't have to listen to them because they don't have your best interest at heart.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, and it was such a really, really fascinating message to come from something specifically meant for children.
What are folks thinking about like critical darling comics of this period? Like, are people still excited about Mr. Miracle? I'm trying to think of what else is like cleaning up on best of lists, but we're curious about folks' thoughts.
I'd say Jeff Lemire on Black Hammer has been phenomenal. I don't know if you guys have been reading that or not.
Is that what is Black Hammer?
It's a Dark Horse book where I've been really into Black Hammer since it came out, and for some inexplicable reason I've actually dropped off it for the last little bit. I think I missed the beginning of the last couple of miniseries, so I'm just kind of waiting to get it all in trade at this point. But I haven't heard a single bad word about anything Jeff Lemire has done this year.
Yeah. Jeff Lemire has done some really, really great stuff at Valiant the past few years.
Yes, he has.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to check out Black Hammer. I actually have a few issues on my desk too. I'm way behind.
I think it also just got options for either a TV show or a movie or something. So it's one of those books I think that the outside world, so to speak, is latching onto as something that could potentially be a story worth exploring in multiple media. And again, it's really great comics. How it will translate, no idea. But that's why I don't get paid to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Jeff Lemire is one of those writers who, when you see he's on something, you know at the very least it will be an interesting story. Whether or not it stays with you for a while, it doesn't matter. You'll know it'll be a ride.
Did anybody keep up on like the Batman fracas or the wedding Marvel?
I read the wedding issue, and like, I don't know, I feel really weird about Tom King. Like, some of his stuff I find amazing. Like, I think Mr. Miracle is quite genius, and then others I just find incredibly tiresome. And the wedding issue was one where it was like, this is half the length, like there's half the book's length worth of content, and it's just like huge numbers of splash pages of like Batman and Catwoman running around with this just really bad descriptive text about them. And I was just not, and also, I mean, this has been a bad year for sort of fake out weddings in general. We had the Kitty and Colossus one, which, like, something of a dodged bullet there, but, like, still, it's just, good superhero comics absolutely can be soap operas, but they should try to be the best that soap operas are and not the worst. I feel like that falls into the worst.
I think Tom King has had some incredible ups and incredible highs on his Batman series when he's been writing it. And he has had some lows that are absolutely... Can I swear? Anyway, I'd say they're absolutely fucking terrible. I've read Batman for... I mean, I read all of the New 52 with Scott Snyder writing Batman, and probably came on around issue 600. Because of Tom King, I no longer collect Batman. I couldn't justify spending the money on an issue that, out of 5 issues, one would be really, really good. One would be okay. One might be good. And the other 2 are usually just drivel. And when you're getting that, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it anymore.
Do you think the issue is that he's writing too many different comics at the same time?
I think so. I think I love Tom King. I think he's a genius writer, and I think you can see that in Mr. Miracle and in a handful of Batman issues that I think he has this great moment planned out. And I think because he's got, and it's something that Joe Hesh says all the time, Tom King's a writer for moments. He must have a plan for a great moment, but getting to that moment, I think, is where he struggles.
So, on a creator that, like, did not disappoint, I mean, I say this all the time, but, like, John Allison's Giant Days may be the most consistently good comic book out there. Just in terms of, like, as you were sort of saying, great writers and great artists, they can have, like, their highs and lows, but, like, Giant Days, there has not been an issue of that comic that has, like, failed to make me just, like, happy for the whole day when I read it.
And you got me into it this year. And
yeah,
I'm
giving it as, like, birthday and Christmas presents to pretty much everybody, just because, like, I want more people to read it.
Yeah, it's almost like it's slice of life college students with, like, just the touch of the fantastical that's mostly used to, like, heighten things in a way that I guess is best described as magical realism, I think is how I would explain it.
Sort of slight surrealist flights of fancy. They're usually, like, it's not so much that surreal stuff is actually happening, it's just that someone is, like, sleep deprived or high or whatever, and they are, like, hallucinating very, very strange things happening.
Yeah.
So who's a longtime industry person who's having a really big second wind this year? Like who you're like, wow, so-and-so's back in black. Like I know that for me, like one of the ongoing comics that I've just been most mainlining, addicted to, read immediately when I get it, is Christopher Priest on Deathstroke. The artists on the book are good, but they're pretty house style-y. I'm really there for Chris Priest's writing. It's so nice to have a villain book by someone who is not trying to make the villain more appealing and recognizes that the villain is the villain. And the whole series is just about how Deathstroke like ruins everybody in his family's life. And it has really pointed humor when it has humor. When it has politics, they're very smart. And it's very long game, in depth, just like so much content. You never feel like you're getting shortchanged. Really a very classic comic on Deathstroke. So good on you, Chris Priest. Who else is having a second wind?
I don't know if you could necessarily call it a second win because, the figuring out the highs and lows of this are hard, but Gillen and McKelvie on Wicked and the Divine. Like, there is a comic that not only is it just absolutely gorgeous pretty much every single issue, but every single issue it breaks my brain and sends me sort of scrambling to do a reread to, like, figure out, what is actually going on and how does this thing fit into that other thing. And, it's an amazing accomplishment that's sort of starting to head into the final stretch. I think there's like maybe 4 or 6 issues left.
Yeah.
And it's just like not stopping or slowing down at all in that final stretch. Sometimes you've got great comics that like start to stumble and fall as they hit the kind of serialized problem. I think for me, like Saga was that for me this year, where I just like finally lost patience. I was like, okay, you can kill your entire cast. I'm not going to be any more shocked than I was the last 10 times you did this. But with Wictiv, it's like every issue is something new and surprising and like makes me rethink characters.
I love it. And you have a podcast about Wictiv.
Yes. I'm working through it issue by issue, which is kind of hard to do, because like a lot of issues make you want to like go on straight to the next one. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun to do that this year.
Bilal, how about you?
I don't know. I would just probably echo what you said about the Deathstroke Priest run. It's just so... I don't know, it's just so dense. And what you said about the political stuff is true, but I also think there's because it's about Deathstroke, like because it's about a villain, some of the political things are very like there's no right answer, there's no actual solution, there's no one solution. Everything is very nuanced, almost incredibly cynical.
Yeah. Which
I really love. And he doesn't try to make anything look better. Like everybody in that book is reprehensible, and all of the nice characters cannot stand to be in the same room as everyone else.
Yeah.
And every issue is just something more and more reprehensible.
I also just love all of his interactions with Batman are like the greatest thing ever. I really wanted to read Priest on Justice League this year, and I just didn't get around to picking it up, which is a real regret of mine.
I wasn't...
Like a short run on Justice League.
I wasn't a big fan of that run.
Oh, okay.
But I appreciate what he was trying to do. Yeah.
So who's somebody, we talked about some folks who are just starting to have a big year, who's having a second wind. What are some of the best critical essays about comics that you've read this year? Doesn't have to be a graphic policy, that's totally fine. And you can also mention if something that you wrote that you feel is particularly great, feel free to share that too.
Well, there's Claire Napier wrote an article about time. It was called "Time in Comics" for the MNT, and it was essentially about how sort of the monthly, like, scheduled comics system is. Well, I guess she was making the argument about different ways of publishing comics every month, and just thinking about well, basically one of her arguments was that when you make every comic writer and artist stick within this sort of rigid idea of every comic comes out every week on Wednesday, every new issue of a comic comes out every month, there are writers and artists who can't or work better outside of that schedule. And she said she wanted to see more works sort of break out of that and try new things, which I think is really interesting. Like like a 12 issue story, and all 12 issues drop on the same day, or an entire series of graphic novels be written and drawn already, and then everyone come out month by month, just something to really shake it up. And then on a personal level, Evan Narcisse wrote about this ongoing comic from Milestone from the 90s, and the sort of I wouldn't call it a reboot, but a revisiting from DC years later for this character called Zombie. And he was talking about the art and it's the character Zombie is he's essentially undead, and the rest of the book is a mix of like technology and magic. There's a lot of body horror. There's a lot of using like mythology and stories from different religions and cultures, and turning it into magical realism. And I think that that article really gives that book and that character the attention it deserved. Yeah.
I know that I've been a really big fan, continue to be a big fan of the Middle Spaces, and Osvaldo Oyola's essays there. He was my guest just this past week to talk about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. But yeah, if folks haven't been reading his stuff in general, like, he just goes in depth and is such smart analysis. And he's a professor in college, and it shows. But I think, like, digging up Ghost, Teen Titan Mal, and his token power is, like, so freaking good. There's so many, just, like, it's great analysis of what is broken about the way black characters have been written by white creators in particular, even when the white creators are trying hard. That is just, like, put a perfect exclamation point on it when he wrote about it. Who else's critical works that you guys are excited about?
I really liked, who knows if it'll survive the detail blurring of 2018, but Tim and Alex Get Twatted, which is a series of essays and stuff about Wicked and the Divine, where, like, not just bringing in kind of your standard comics analysis, but, like, some really deep dives into history and, like, breaking down world history for 10,000 years, and how that links to visual design is quite impressive.
Tumblr has so many brilliant scholars of the Wicked and the Divine. I really hope that I continue to be able to read those essays there. Because I would regularly see something on the Wicked and the Divine tags on Tumblr that would just blow my mind.
Yeah, well, all they have to do now is just put safe for work tags at the bottom of every post. Should all be fine.
Yeah, there you go. No big deal. Anybody find anything that you really liked that got canceled this year?
I wouldn't say. Well, this was. I guess this ended and it wasn't technically canceled, but I still think it had a lot of potential to keep going and telling more interesting stories. And it was Steve Orlando's Justice League of America, and I just wanted to see what the next step with that book was, and it just sort of, ended.
And that was the JLA with like the really weird team.
Yeah, and I think he really got what made that team interesting as characters, and then putting them together under Batman and making them work together was really cool. Like, probably the most interesting Vixen writing in a long time. Vixen and the Atom and Killer Frost, and just some really interesting character work.
I mean, I don't know. This, you may want to cut this. I was gonna say, I don't know if we should talk about Border Town because it's just such a fucked up story overall. Like, it was a brilliant comic, but like, knowing what we know now, it's hard to say. I'm sad to see it go.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, folks, like Border Town, really was enjoying it. Ramon Villalobos, who's been on the show, was amazing. Was the artist on it. Eric Esquivel was the writer. It recently came out that he was like sexually harassing and gaslighting women in the industry and just being terrible. So the series got canceled, and which is like the thing you're supposed to do. But yeah, it really sucks when like men being terrible gets in the way of whatever amazing art the women he harassed would have been able to do if he hadn't been traumatizing them. Yeah. And also the amazing work that Tamara Bonvillain and Ramon Villalobos were doing on that comic,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I really liked about that situation was how immediate both Ramon and Tamara were after it happened, like immediately saying like, I'm off of this book. I'm proud of my work, but I'm not working with this person again. And I think, we're probably going to talk more about it, but one of the really great things that I think happened in comics from an industry perspective and from like a fan perspective was just sort of pointing out bad behavior publicly and saying like, this is bad. This person did this. We want to hold them accountable. And that's I think that the situation with Border Town was a really great example of just people wanting to hold someone accountable.
But meanwhile, Scott Lobdell is still writing like 2 comics for DC, and he's like publicly sexually harassed women. Yeah. And he's still around. It's like it's much easier to get them to can someone who's new and has little power in the industry than it is to get them to can someone who's been around for a long time. And I know him, I'm sure he didn't mean it, or like whatever justifications they want to cook up.
That's true. Yeah.
But I definitely think this has been a big year for accountability. I mean, one of the the big things is like we finally saw big names in comics standing up to the harassment, right-wing extremist harassment mob that calls itself Comicsgate. Like, they'd been going after all these amazingly talented trans women in the industry, and those trans women had mostly been left to like fend for themselves without the industry doing shit to support them, and it was just disgusting. And then suddenly Comicsgate went after Darwin Cook's widow, and suddenly like the big names in the industry decided to stand up to them, because only when a straight woman is harassed can they be bothered to put their necks out there to protect each other. But they have now finally been fighting against the Comicsgate folks and shutting them down.
Yeah, and the sort of one structural thing that's been kind of somewhat good to see is the, like, slow, gradual kind of, I mean, deplatforming is a strong word to use, but, like, anything that interferes with the ongoing grift train, I think, is a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where people losing access to Patreon or getting demonetized on YouTube. It's just like, what's so insidious about all of this is that it's, like, not just, the kind of evil mob mentality stuff, but, like, people making their livings off of spreading this shit, and that's slowly starting to break down. I think is a really hopeful sign.
Well, somebody who made a really big difference this year, who I'm definitely putting up as my unsung hero in the industry of the year, is Jay Edidin. His podcast, Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, continues to be one of the greatest podcasts of all time that I have nothing to do with. But, he's been someone who has exposed big names harassing people in the industry. He finally got Eddie Bergeza fired from DC Comics. But one of the big things is he did the successful campaign this past year to get Dark Horse to actually cover trans people's healthcare needs in their health insurance policy. And he did that by, like, actually organizing a campaign around it. I spoke a bit about this at length actually at FlameCon, but, like, too often when people want to see a change in the comics industry, they'll just sort of announce it on Twitter, and then once they've sort of thrown the idea to the world, like, they don't do anything else. So, of course, I mean, maybe if the idea is really compelling, a lot of people retweet it, but that's it. There's no actual plan of how you're going to make that change, and then nothing happens. And in this case, Jay actually organized, like a letter from industry people to Dark Horse, and, like, really explained the issue in depth to folks, and they were beginning to move the letter, and he'd done all this research on the policies, and, like, actually built a campaign, and it worked, and they changed their policy, So definitely my big hero of the year is Jay Edidin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know a few of you are, into, like, Valiant and Lion Forge and stuff like that. Do we have any particular non-Big Two superhero series deserving a shout out? I was just catching up on Summit. Amy Chu, Jan Duursma, and then there's a new artist who's taken over. But Summit is a Lion Forge comic, very much a science first sort of sci-fi superhero story. I really enjoy the humor on it, and, like, having a badass woman astronaut who's queer as your protagonist, and her whole, like, support team, because she's at MIT, that's why it's Summit. Her whole support team are all, like, super international, just like it would be at MIT, like people from around the world, with, like, very specific characterization, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is a very it's a very fun and beautiful comic. Yeah. Going back to Lion Forge, I think Noble is really like really found its footing with me, at least. I love that it's about this black man, like, superhero, but the book is focused on him and his relationship with his wife, both, like, being, pushed into this really both being pushed into a really dire situation, and them, like, both just, like, staying strong in their love for each other.
It's a really important comic. I mean, when I was at the Black Comics Con at the Brooklyn Museum, like, everybody's tables were all Black Panther, Luke Cage, Storm, and Noble. Like, those were, like, the iconic 4 superheroes that were really up there.
Oh, yeah.
Alex, I know you're, like, Mr. Valiant.
I've really been enjoying Ninja K this year. It's kind of been scratching the back.
That's not Ninjak. It's Ninja K.
Yeah, I think they did Ninja K to differentiate the two volumes. Ninjak ended, I think, 2017-ish, and then they relaunched Ninja K this year. And so the idea behind Ninja K is that the current Ninjak, Colin King, is K, and then you had A through, I don't alphabet off the top of my head, A through J up until that point. And so the series has been telling the stories of some of the older ninjas, members of the ninja program, and how they have been through brainwashing, manipulation, just absolutely awful things from the British government, just to keep them in peak performance so that they can use them as weapons. And it's also been able to scratch the Batman itch for me because, Ninja K or Ninjak is basically Valiant's version of Batman, who has no compunctions about killing people who quote unquote deserve to be killed. And again, sticking with Valiant, Exo Manowar.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have always felt Exo Manowar has been Valiant's flagship character, and that may be changing next year or the year after when the Bloodshot movie's coming out with Vin Diesel. But right now, I think Matt Kint on Exo Manowar has written some of the best comics I've read in a long time, as he's taken him from, on a different planet, kind of farmer grunt, up through the ranks to soldier, to eventually ruling a planet, and then breaking him right back down again. And as he's doing this, he's exploring what does it mean to really lead people, to find yourself. Can you lead people and lose yourself and still keep who you are at your heart, or do you have to lose parts of yourself in order to serve the greater good? And it's been 23-ish issues that have just blown my mind with each one, and part of that is also the art. I think the art is phenomenal in almost every issue.
Who are some of the artists on it? Do you know?
Tomas, Giorello, I think Luis LaRosa is in there as well. Miko Suyan. My pronunciation is awful, and I don't remember all the artists off the top of my head.
That's cool, though. I see Giorello. I saw his stuff on Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah, I think with Exo Manowar, it would be very easy to see it and think like, oh, this is an Iron Man ripoff, but I think they do such a great job of making, the main character Eric and everyone around him and the mythology around him really really compelling. And I kind of think of it like a science fiction version of a Sword and Sandals movie.
I heard someone call it at the beginning of the series, it's basically Space Conan. And they're not wrong to an extent. It is basically Space Conan, where, Arak is the he's from the 500 AD. He's transported to the modern times and has very little understanding ish of modern technology, and then you throw him into a hyper advanced suit of armor, and then you throw him off to a distant planet. It's it's beyond fish out of water stuff, and at the same time it's just really great storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody have any all ages comics that were really exciting this year? I really think that the Over the Garden Wall series put out by Boom, that has a ton of different talent on it. Jim Campbell, Kara McGee, Kieran Surgeon-Lien, and Danielle Borgos. The Over the Garden Wall comics just continue to be really beautiful in the same sort of way as the TV show. They can get a little bit Shaggy Dog story rambling. I think that they do read best in trade paperback, but I think they're really beautiful comics, and really imaginative and good for folks of all ages.
Fence from Boom as well has also been really good this year.
Oh, that's
It's
like the sports anime comic, right?
Yeah. It's I mean, I used to fence, so I kind of picked it up for that reason, just to see how authentic it was to what I remembered the sport being. And it's a really, really interesting book. You've got the kid who has a lot of raw talent but no training. You've got the kid who is just, world number 2 or 3, and everyone else just trying to make the fencing team. Now, it feels like they're telling a lot of story and not a whole lot of things are actually happening. Like, there's a lot of character development in the 6 to 8 issues that I remember reading, but it's really, really good. There's a lot of positive messages in there.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about it is, like, it does have that extreme decompression thing from anime, where it's like, how long did the tryouts take? Was it like 8 issues or something like that? Or it's like literally this course of 2 days, but it's like every moment has to be so emotionally intense, and that, like, every match has to have its own issue practically.
Yeah.
And everyone's got their own, like, emotional arc that they have to complete. It's so good.
And I think one of the best parts about it is there isn't an antagonist so much. Like, each one of the boys is fighting, each other, obviously, because it's fencing, but the primary struggle is every single one of them is struggling with something inside. So whether it's the world number 2 is recently beaten and he's trying to, find himself so that he can, or not find himself, but qualify for the fencing team just so he can go and avenge his defeat against the person that beat him. You've got the kid that's just trying to prove that he is someone, and not at one point do you want to cheer for one kid over the other, because each and every one of them has their own journey.
Yeah, I'd say the only one I don't like is the dude who never, like, remembers his hookups' names, which is just
Aiden?
rude.
You know what? I actually do like him because he's a dick. And,
yeah, I mean, like, he's a very good antagonist character.
Yeah.
It's like, feels like something out of, hold on, why am I blanking on the name? What's the fencing anime revolution?
I don't want to leave you out to dry, but I don't watch anime.
Yeah,
and
pulling sword out of chest. Utena, that's the... He reminds me of an Utena antagonist. Like, perfect hair, kind of a sneer.
And it's funny because this whole series is existing in, like, a completely, I mean, I guess there's some characters who I think might be non-binary. I'm not sure, but, like, predominantly a male-focused romance stories.
Yeah, I think it's all in a boys' boarding school. Now, I know, so I don't know if they would have females in the boarding school, or but I
no,
think
but
it's
I mean,
more
like,
leading toward.
I think it's not. I only read a few issues and it's been a while, but I think I'm not necessarily sure how Bobby identifies.
And that's what I mean. That's what I was agreeing with you in that. I think it's good. It's a brilliant all ages story that also addresses this or that without making it a thing. It's just, there's Bobby, and Bobby's just Bobby.
Yeah, like Bobby exists in this story, and there's no particular negative attention paid towards Bobby, and Bobby is just allowed to be, like, allowed to exist in all these spaces with everyone else without it turning into something. But Bobby clearly doesn't express gender in the way everyone else does, which I really appreciate.
Cool. And I think this is also the only comic series that really acknowledged the success of Hockey Comic. Oh my God! Check, please.
Just checking. Check, please. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, just checking.
Wait.
God damn it.
Yes, it's like the biggest comic of the year is like a web-only, self-published sports romance comic, and Fence, I think, is the only comic by a publisher to actually recognize that other comic is freaking huge and try to grow on the audience.
Yeah, and they actually hired someone who has written I can't remember the author's name, but she's written I wouldn't say similar stories, but you can look at her past writing and what they were going to with Fence and see an overlap in audience. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Smart, yeah.
Yeah, very very smart writer choice.
Oh, another young people friendly comic that also fits the category of got canceled, but then got brought back as completely predicted by yours truly, is Unstoppable Wasp. And I think that, not surprisingly, this comic that's really great for young girls didn't sell that well in floppies. Who could have predicted?
Yeah.
But then sold really well on digital and in trade paperback. Who could have predicted? So it was canceled and now it's back. But just a really fun series. The action scenes are really good. It's full of like queer and racially diverse young women, and they're all really written well, and their relationships with each other are really written well. I mean, Jeremy Whitley is like, I'm a huge fan of Raven the Pirate Princess, and all of that is carried on here, although with less of a romance focus than Raven has. But Unstoppable Wasp, definitely glad to see it back.
What I really like...
I didn't know it went, because Marvel's whole thing of, like, every year we've got to have 2 number 1s from every series confuses the shit out of me. So I don't know what's there and what's not.
Yeah, one thing I really like about how he writes the main character, Nadia, is she doesn't understand a lot of what's happening. Like, she was basically raised in a dark room with no experience with the outside world, and he gives her all of these moments of trying to understand the world around her, but it doesn't make her. It doesn't. She's not the butt of the joke. For the most part, it's very much like, okay, if you didn't know what I don't know, if you didn't know what Twitter was, you would probably think the same things Nadia thinks about Twitter. Like, it doesn't make her an idiot like a lot of these type of stories would. Mm-hmm. So also something an ongoing series from last year came out with 2 like holiday specials this year, and it was Backstagers by James Tynion the Fourth, and they did a Valentine's Day special and a Halloween special, and yeah, Backstagers is such a, I don't know, it's such a fun and cute story. I'm really into like the kitschy side of horror, like not so much scary, but like horror that's like scary, but it's also fun and funny and a little bit campy. And I think that series does all of that while also making really interesting like teenage characters.
Yeah, it's a very sweet comic and makes me very nostalgic for doing theater in high school.
Yeah, same.
It was never quite as magical as that. So as we wrap up this episode, does anybody have any other comics, essays, people, characters you want to give a shout out to? I mean, I feel bad. We actually haven't talked about Black Panther at all, but it feels like so much of that energy has come from the movies, and we'll be doing a different episode to talk about movies and stuff like that.
Okay. I was going to ask, because I was like, this has been such a amazing, crazy year for comic book movies that...
Yeah, we know we're going to do movies later, but like Black Panther, in terms of like the comics, I mean, the new series Evan Narcisse was starting. I haven't kept up on it, but it looked really good. And now there's a Shuri series. Like, they're finally really building out the Black Panther world. I mean, I think it's obvious that Black Panther is the comics character of the year, but...
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. Evan Narcisse's Rise of the Black Panther series was... I think that and Ed Pixar's X-Men Grand Design were some really fun and smart, like basically retellings of stories we've seen before. And yeah, they were really really interesting reads for this year.
I really felt like, I had meant to keep up, but didn't. But I felt like The Rise of the Black Panther had a very Claremontian level of like text bang for your buck going on.
Yeah, yeah.
As someone who's not usually into decompression, I liked that, and it got me excited about Ramonda as a character also.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. He definitely wrote the women in that book with a lot of with a lot of detail, especially Shuri. Shuri does Shuri comes off really great in that book. Oh, you know what? I'll just add I'm really enjoying Bill Quist Evely's work in the Sandman, in the Dreaming. I guess it's a revisiting the Sandman universe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think her work on that book is really stunning. I meant to read
that, and then I didn't, and now you're reminding me I should. Which one is Bill Quist working on within the Sandman universe?
It's the Dreaming. So it's kind of centered in that dreaming universe, or the dream realm, I guess.
Thank you for reminding me. That's definitely something I meant to read. Well, okay, y'all. Thank you for joining me. Does anybody want to say where folks can follow your work on the internet? Bilal?
You can follow me at Twitter at Bilalpaup, at BILALIPAUP. I'm always posting stuff I've written this year.
Cool. Alex?
Yeah, almost everything I write is at Graphic Policy, and you can follow me on Twitter at K Cossa, KARCOSSA.
Excellent. Steven?
You can find me at Graphic Policy. You can also find me at Twitter at Stephen Attewell, or on WordPress and Tumblr at Race for the Iron Throne.
Great. And this is Elana, ELANA_Brooklyn. We're going to be doing an episode about best film and movies of the year coming up real soon. And then we're going to have Leah Williams on to talk about her amazing X-Men comics that she's been doing. And always, keep checking Graphic Policy for new reviews and stuff like that. As we like to say, keep it geeky, and a happy holidays.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.